My name is Tony Jones, and you are tuned in to The Coalition, where we explore all sides of local, regional, and national news, politics, and current events. Online at coalitionradio.us, on Facebook, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and on the almighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Live over the airwaves and online. We are broadcasting live on Spreaker again this evening, so if you have your handy Spreaker app, you can check us out there. With me in studio, as always, is the luxurious P.O. taxpayer. P.O., good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
And Chris is here. Christine, good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
It's going to be a fantastic show this evening because, unlike other media outlets, unlike a lot of alternative media, we let our guests, I know this is novel, we let our guests now, talk. And that's what we'll be doing tonight with Mr. Caprio. We do have some questions coming in through Twitter, so you can get those in on the Twitter feed at Coalition_radio. And P.O., I will hand the floor over to you.
Now, Tony, to reiterate the ground rules, these are our own personal Fight Club rules here. Very, very simple. At the Coalition, we do not handicap elections. We don't care about polls. We don't care about fundraising. We don't care about announcement dates. We are soundbite free. We don't care if the candidate wins. We want to know why they should. The second and most important part of our standards here is that we are an outrage porn-free zone. All right? We will simply not tolerate emotion-driven issues that cloud legitimate policy questions. No Christmas trees, no prayer banners. There will not ever be a single discussion of a football team mascot. On the other hand, we will always be willing to discuss gun raffles. Okay, gun raffles are an important part of the show.
But that's because it amuses us.
It amuses us. As we mentioned over the last few weeks, the Stinger missile auction was a great success. We're announcing I've gotten a hold of a vintage Scud, a Gulf War I, that we're going to be putting up for auction. Go to our Facebook page. Tony, our Facebook page?
Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio.
So tonight's special guest joins a long list of political heavyweights in this state. We're especially proud to have Frank Caprio tonight. Frank, as you know, was our general treasurer and has decided to announce for general treasurer again. Just give a little bit of a background. He is a Hendricken man. We all know now what Hendricken men are. A proud Hendricken graduate. He's a Harvard graduate. Tony, we seem to have a rush of academically superior people on the show. How do we handle ourselves? He's also a former member of the Harvard baseball team. Did you play ball with Stenhouse?
No, Mike Stenhouse is a little older than me, but someone that I looked up to as a Rhode Island high school ball player, and looked up to his dad also, who was the coach of Brown when I was in high school. So, the Stenhouse is, legendary family. And actually, Mike's son just graduated from URI. He was a top ball player, too, and he helped coach my son a little bit this last summer.
So when you become general treasurer again, will you play ball with Mike Stenhouse?
Well, I think a lot of Mike, and on the baseball field, we had a lot in common, and we'll see if on policy issues we can work together down the road. Okay.
Also a graduate of Suffolk Law. Now, you were a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives from 1990 to 1994. You then became a Rhode Island senator from 94 to 2006. You also became general treasurer, obviously, from 2006 to 2011. In doing research, and obviously I'm familiar with you over the years. I've actually spoken to you on talk radio before, just so you know, for the record, on other people's shows, and kind of bringing together all the different thoughts we had about past campaigns, your career in the Senate and the House of Representatives. I chose to kind of break down your public life into three acts. The first act I'd like to describe is, of course, your time in the legislature. Very significant. And it's interesting because so much goes on in Rhode Island politics that there is always some sort of crisis du jour, and we tend to lose the institutional memory of everything that went before us. So on one path, your path to politics was pretty standard. I mean, college, law school, you got involved in politics, but unlike many of your compatriots up at Halitosis Hall, as I think they call it, you continue to be employed in the dreaded private sector, in finance and investment banking. How did that shape your legislative agenda, as well as your grasp of the all-important job creation issue?
Well, P.O., first of all, you skipped over one part of my background that I'm very happy to report, because we celebrated a championship this weekend. I played football up at school also at Harvard.
Really?
And I did. And as you know, Harvard shared the Ivy League championship this weekend. They beat Yale for like the 11th out of 12 years in a row, whatever. And so anyway, it was a good weekend for the football squad and for the former football players to be cheering them on.
My daughter's involved in one of the Ivies. I won't say where, but let's just say there's no chance that they will ever be mentioned in that category.
So enough about the good old days. But you mentioned being in the legislature and also being in the private sector, for pretty much close to two decades, and it brings I think a full perspective of what's going on in the economy. What's when you're risking money to make money and risking capital to create jobs, you have to deal in the real world and make decisions that hopefully are going to have the entity that you're involved with be successful and keep the job strong for those who are working alongside you. So you go into the legislature and you see what's going on the government side with budgets that seem to be always out of balance, and you need to make decisions down the stretch, sometimes 2-3 in the morning on the last night of a session, and you probably wouldn't run things in your own business that way. Make important policy decisions that way. So, I look back on those years, and actually my first day in office in 1991 was the day that all the credit unions were closed.
Wow.
So, in the day that Governor Sondland was sworn in as governor, and his first act was to shut all those banks and credit unions, and a third of the state's families and businesses had their checkbooks locked up. So we think times are tough now. That those days were a little difficult if you think back.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. We're libertarians and greens on this show, and a significant part of our audience literally were children at that point in time. They didn't go through that trial by fire that Rhode Island went through. So at the same token, they're highly educated and highly motivated politically as they listen to shows like this and explore new media to form their own political opinions. So it's important that we reflect back on that, because the obvious question is, as we constantly go through these lurches in Rhode Island, how is it that those kind of things can be created and recreated? Later on, I'm going to ask you about an analogy and draw an analogy between the credit union crisis and 38 Studios. But so you've got the big picture then. You're creating jobs actively. You're actively employed with the employment issue. You actually see the birthing process of a business as it creates itself and moves forward and becomes a prominent employer within the state. Now, at the same time, there were other issues that were consuming Rhode Island. Over the past few years, it's been all pensions all the time. Importantly so. Legitimate issue, a legitimate crisis facing the state. In your initial years in the state legislature, though, there were a couple of other big players. It's amazing to think back to a time when separation of powers didn't exist. That separation of powers was something that people had to expend political capital and blood for. Tell us a little bit about that battle.
Sure. Yeah, it was a concept that just about every other state in the union and the federal government followed, and for whatever reason, Rhode Island didn't feel as though it was necessary. It started to gain some momentum locally with some of the legislators and other groups pushing for it. But as you know, in the State House, if the leadership of the House and the Senate, don't want something to get momentum or get in front of the committees or the floor for a vote, it's not going to happen. And
let me just jump in for a second. At the time, you could have legislators sitting on all these quasi-government boards, which seem to really run Rhode Island to this day, and to be sitting on these boards and at the same time making the decisions, the manner and the level to which these boards were funded. And at the time, the political conventional wisdom, and I hate to use those terms when it comes to Rhode Island, but was that was fine. That was entirely appropriate. And as a result, there was, you talk about some of the power structures in this state. These were so intrinsically wound up within each other. You choosing to take this on, just give us a little of the chemistry that was going on at the time.
Sure. Well, in most states and federal government, there's an executive, whether it's the president or a governor, that appoints leaders of the different administrative departments, and then it's the legislature that funds those departments. It has the purse strings. And as you said, Rhode Island had a different process where the legislators not only funded the administrative departments, but also ran most of them by appointing legislative members to the boards and commissions. So, and I'm going to not have the specific years in front of me because I didn't come with a notebook of all those memories, but there was a few of us in the Senate and a few in the House who made this a very important issue where we were not going to continue voting for certain things, or and we were potentially going to start to be disruptive as this process continued to play on if separation of powers was not going to be enacted. And I think back, there were people like Mike Lenahan in the Senate, and actually when Don Cacciari was running for governor, it was an issue that he put forward as something that he wanted to see happen. There were, in the House, I had my brother David Caprio, who was on the front lines on this issue, and other members of the House. So fast forward in 2003, 4-ish, and again, I don't have the exact date in front of me, but separation of powers eventually went on the ballot, and lo and behold, I think about 80% of the people voted for it, some round number like that.
Yeah, surprise, surprise.
And,
people actually cared about that.
And now, Rhode Island joined the other almost, 50 states. I think there may be one or two exceptions still that have some form of the legislators being on the boards. But we joined kind of the modern era, and the executive appoints the people to serve on these boards and run the administrative side of the state, and the legislature provides oversight and provides the funding. So that's how our system was envisioned a few centuries ago. And now Rhode Island is following pretty much that same framework.
At the time, there was a political cost to you, though, correct?
Oh, well, I think back on whether I was stripped of committee chairmanships, or I was, kicked out of my office, or,
had to park over
in
Olneyville.
You need a seeing eye dog and a guide to find your car after the session. But again, at the time, it may have been a little uncomfortable, to have your office, just shut down and your stuff put out in the hallway, and but that's not why I got involved in
right.
running for office.
And when 80% of people vote for something, you're on the right track.
So again, and I appreciate you bringing up these things, because it's not something that is talked about much these days, but it's kind of a foundation of what's happened over the last 20 years here in Rhode Island, 20 plus years. Whether it's getting through that banking crisis, separation of powers, going from this far off concept to reality, and but so many people spent countless hours, and like you said, there was a lot of political repercussions to taking on those causes, but. Whether it was, you're challenged in a primary. I think of, my brother David in Narragansett. He had a opponent that was sponsored by the Speaker of the House and given a blank check to run against him, and had the endorsement for the local town taken away from, his as an incumbent. And lo and behold, the people in the town saw right through that, and he won that primary against a very well-known and popular town councilman. With just about 75% of the vote in the early 2000s there.
The tradition of shall we say, dictatorial speakerships really can be traced back many years. But if, and I'm going to appeal to the younger crowd here when I draw this analogy, if there was ever a Sith Lord in Rhode Island, go Star Wars on you for a second, it was truly John Harwood. Here's a man who ruled with an iron fist and essentially tried to extract whatever political blood he could in exchange for maintaining the status quo, and really left a difficult legacy for folks like you to take over. Talk about the banking crisis. It's become relevant in a sense because we refer to our past guests as alumni. Dawson Hodgson had spent an hour with us a few weeks ago, and he's gone public. He's been possibly one of the most aggressive and I think reasonable voices in terms of investigating what went on with 38 Studios. It's his contention, and I'd like your reflection on this, having lived through the banking crisis and the subsequent investigations, that we need to do that same style of post-due diligence, that same type of investigation into 38 Studios that we did under the Sunderland administration in a fraction of the time directly after the events. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the banking crisis from a dollars and cents standpoint was in 1991 $600 million.
Wow. So
that's 23 years ago. Put inflation on that, it's probably more like $1.25 billion, $1.5 billion present value issue. So with that price tag that the taxpayers made good on, to Rhode Island's hardworking taxpayers' credit, the depositors got their money back. The sales tax still hasn't gone back down, the 1% that was put in place to pay off those bonds. But comparing that to 38 Studios, and the type of investigation, I think is something that I wouldn't have a problem with. The review that's been done so far on 38 Studios really has been financial so-called experts from the bond side of the desk, giving us their opinions, and they seem to be conflicted anyway, because it's the people that are trying to sell bonds on behalf of the state coming in saying whether we should pay this bond back or not. Mm-hmm. But an independent review of what not only happened to make that deal a reality, and then what the repercussions might be if the payments aren't made to the current bondholders. I mean, that's stuff that should be done, and should be done in a very, very in-depth way over the next few years.
So if elected treasurer, you would voice an affirmative of that, particularly given the financial burden that will be placed on the state and its possible impact on pension funding and other issues.
When I was finishing off my term as treasurer in 2010, I went to the rating agencies just before the bonds were sold, and I said, don't rate these bonds. Wait until after the election with a new governor and a new legislature.
That's correct.
And part of the lawsuit that's now being contested, there's sections in that complaint that say that when I made that request of the EDC board, because they controlled the timeline and the issuance of the bonds, when I made that request, that there were the outside advisors to the board who then, and this again according to the complaint, I wasn't in these meetings, it was said to them that they couldn't stall the process, that there were going to be serious financial repercussions if they didn't go forward on the timeline that had been laid out, and they couldn't wait till after the election. Well, that was false. That was not an accurate statement. The board, seems relied on those types of statements, and the bonds were sold before the election, and we all know what the history now is. That this isn't. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately to this issue. I was trying to do all that I could at that time, because they weren't so-called state bonds, but bonds of the EDC entity. The state treasurer had no official role, right. And it's not that I had to sign any documents or negotiate with the bond market to get those bonds sold, like the treasurer does on the general obligation state bonds that the state sells regularly. So so that was very, very disturbing to me at the time. Actually, the Governor Kacheri, said I was being political. Right. Said I was being political, and that the board, and the others should pay no attention to what I was saying. So you look back on those clips now, and I don't think I was being political. I think I was looking out for the people of Rhode Island, and now we're stuck with an annual $12 million bill for the next whatever it is, 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah, it seems that I seem to remember there were people across the political spectrum who were skeptical of the deal, to say the least, at that point. And
correct.
If there was ever a rush to judgment, it's sort of like selling a car. The whole notion that if I don't buy this car now and don't take this deal now, that somehow that car won't be available tomorrow. And
right. That's exactly what it was like. It was like trying to sell people on the monorail idea or something.
It's and of course, here's the weighted question: what do you think the repercussions would be to Rhode Island as an investment professional if we don't pay the bonds?
Yeah, because they're so-called moral obligation bonds, which is again a term of art created by the bond market to give them a feeling like you're supposed to do certain things, moral things surrounding this financial instrument. It gets a little comical when you attach the term moral to a bond payment, when the people who have packaging the bonds, many of the largest banks and financial entities of the world, have all been hit with serious
right.
charges and paid fines from the Securities Exchange Commission, Justice Departments, you name it. So, but we're supposed to be moral and,
right.
and make these payments. So,
and these fines are in many cases tax deductible for them. So.
Again,
so we're paying for somebody's alleged morals too. On
so what would be the impact is the question from PO. And again, my feeling on this is Rhode Island has a very strong bond rating when it comes to its general obligation bonds, meaning that the taxpayers put their hard work into pay taxes, and out of the taxes, Rhode Island balances its budget and pays the bonds that are currently owed, of the bonds that went on the ballot, and people voted saying, yes, we should build dormitories at URI, yes, we should build roads in the state, yes, we should build other structures that, again, taxpayers have made a decision and supported on the ballot. They never voted for 38 studios. It was by a statute that the state legislature created, and because of that, the taxpayers don't have to affirmatively pay these bonds. And there's supposed to be a study that the legislature has commissioned on answering that exact question from a financial expert. It's been reported to me after asking around, because I know they had a request for proposal out for the firm that would be taking on that study, but it's come, I think, that nobody responded.
Interesting.
So maybe all the firms that could respond feel conflicted because they don't necessarily maybe want to tell the truth. Well, what's the old line, Jack Nicholson?
It's
you can't handle the truth,
right?
Right? Because the truth may very well be that the purchasers of these bonds, which were some of the largest insurance companies, and this isn't grandma on her pension, buying $1,000 worth of a bond and expecting to get it paid back. These are multinational, multi-billion-dollar entities that know the risks of these types of bonds. Mm-hmm. And they take write-offs on a regular basis, those types of investors in the millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of range. And they may even pay penalties and fees to regulators and others when they may be found to have done certain things. But it's my gut feeling, without digging in at this stage, that Rhode Island's bond rating for its most of its debt would not be affected at all. And it probably would be a good practice to not issue moral obligation bonds in the future, and have more of a voter approval process. If it's such a good idea, then it shouldn't just be a handful of people in a boardroom making a decision. Let's put it on the ballot.
One of the few vestiges of the separation of powers was the continued independence, if you will, of a handful of these quasi-governmental agencies. Astonishingly enough, I don't know if it's sort of like baseball and still being able to stand independent of any of the regular rules that affect everybody else. But shouldn't this spell really the doom of these quasis? I mean, isn't this one of the biggest stealth problems affecting the state, that you've got these independent agencies that have the ability to issue bonds based on the judgment call of potentially a handful of conflicted individuals?
The quasi-public entities sometimes run amok. Mm-hmm. And when I was in office in 2007 to 10, there was a lot of review of what was going on at the Solid Waste Management Corporation, affectionately known as the Dump, right, in Johnston, the highest point in Rhode Island, I guess. And so we read all these stories, and the governor at the time called for an audit, and there was an audit done, and they showed they bought a bunch of land they shouldn't have bought. They spent money on a lot of stuff they shouldn't have spent money on, and everybody was moaning and groaning on radio, newspaper articles, television stories, but nobody was really proposing what maybe we could do, and I proposed that. Again, as state treasurer, it wasn't my official role, but it was because of my background in business and law. I know that those types of entities, their boards of directors, carry directors and officers liability insurance. And I said, why don't we present a claim to the insurer? Because it seems that these officers and directors did something wrong, according to this audit. And, I saw something play out that, again, I've been a lawyer for a little over 2 decades, and there's others that have much more experience and much more knowledge than I do in that area. But I saw something with, based on my experience that I had never seen in my legal career, and that was we, the state, presented a few-page letter, a demand letter of the insurance company saying, we hereby demand the $5 million policy. That was the extent of the policy, based on, these factors. And, the audit was attached. And usually the insurance company will send back, and their lawyers will send back, a very generic response. And then you'll get a response from the lawyers, and then you'll be in court for years and years and years. No, the insurance company sent back a letter saying, we will be paying you $5 million.
Wow.
Without spending one day in court, without having one deposition, with nothing.
Not even a second letter.
It was so egregious.
Wow.
And I looked at that and I said, we accomplished something good for the state. We got some money back for some misdeeds there, but it gets to your point, Pio, that these quasi-publics need to be reined in. There needs to be more accountability, and we need to look at going forward and not having these things, replicated. Then lo and behold, here we are, 38 studios, same thing, another quasi-public, but this time the lawsuit, it wasn't, something that I was in office at the time, but it became, now in fashion. Let's bring a lawsuit against the directors and officers' liability insurance, and let's see what we can get.
Well, I mean, and I'm, after the break, I'm going to jump ahead then to the next act, your public life, which was as general treasurer. But then even as general treasurer, you had some serious interaction with the Rhode Island Student Loan Authority. You had a for-profit company masking themselves, I think it was Nelnet, was masking themselves as essentially an arm of a not-for-profit, but engaging in some pretty sketchy loan marketing practices. And you, as treasurer, and this is, my contention in the next after the break, is that I am convinced, while we all obsess over a constitutionally weak gubernatorial election, not a reflection on the individual involved, but essentially a near figurehead position in state government, it's my contention that there is no other single position in state government that affects the wallets, the pockets, the futures of Rhode Islanders harder than the general treasurer's position. Fair statement?
Well, when your name is on every check that goes out, whether it's to an employee, a vendor, or anybody in between, I think it gives you tremendous leadway to inquire and dig in and get answers, because there's no area of state government where the treasurer is not involved, is at least in making sure the check clears. The check is presented and paid. So, and I think as America and Rhode Island has seen, in the last 6-7 years, what's happened, between Wall Street and Main Street. The Treasurer's Office deals with both sides of that equation and needs to do it in a fashion that looks out for the taxpayers.
We are about halfway through the program, which means we need to take a quick break. We'll have more with Mr. Caprio after this. CoalitionRadio.us on Facebook, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On Twitter, some questions coming in at Coalition_Radio. We'll get to all that and so much more after our quick break.
Heading out on the town tonight? Be sure to log on to providencenightout.com and don't forget to check their cell phone app. That's providencenightout.com.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Jones. You know, when I'm not here yakking about politics, I spin records. That's right, if you like good old-fashioned rock and roll radio the way God intended it to be, then tune in to The Tony Jones Show. The information's online at tonyjones.org. That's tonyjones.org.
I found a picture of you.
13 Folds is your definitive source for cannabis culture, with a print magazine, radio show, live events, and so much more. Check them out online at 13folds.com. That's the number 13, FOLDS.com.
Tony Jones here. You are tuned in to the Coalition, coalitionradio.us. Mr. Caprio coming in on the almighty Twitter, which I like to promote because I am now a Twitter stockholder. I got caught up in that IPO. I said, take my money, P.T. Barnum, take my money. So coming in on Twitter at coalition_radio, Mr. Robert Cusack, who I believe is from Warwick, Rhode Island. Treasurer, would you sell all the hedge funds in the state pension fund, or would you keep some?
Yeah, I would replicate the same process I did in 2007 when I was in office, and that was go through the pension fund, not just the hedge funds, but every holding that the pension fund has, and look at the holding, whether we think it's fairly valued, overvalued, undervalued, and make a decision that way. When we did that in 2007, we stumbled upon about $1 billion that was in subprime mortgage bonds, and this was when they were trading at a very high level, and everything was fine. And we decided that they were not only full value, we thought they were overvalued, and we decided to exit those. So specifically about hedge funds, I wouldn't today say we're going to sell all the hedge funds and never own a hedge fund.
Throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But what I would do is I would go through each and every one of them, and I would make a determination and not be gun shy to exit them, because as I said in the past, we exited many of the funds. Tried to get the fees as low as possible. I know the fees now are much higher than when I was in office, and I'd like to see the fees be, on the lower end, just like in your own 401k. If your fees were double or triple what your colleagues' fees were, and you were getting less of a return because of that, you're probably going to say I should make some changes in my 401k if I'm underperforming that way. So that would be my style.
Now, this next question, which you kind of did touch on, and I'm sure we could do a whole show on this one issue. So. But briefly, Mr. Cusack also wants to know what should be done to reform the local pension funds in Rhode Island.
Yeah, I think we have a good model right next door in Massachusetts. They have a process where if a local pension fund is not following a preset list, of criteria, then it is automatically moved into the state pension fund for it to manage it, and the associated costs with doing that, the town or the city has to take care of. So that I'd like to see us to have a similar process, because it's it's people's future that you're dealing with. People are paying into these pensions at the cities and towns, thinking that they're going to get their money back in their pension someday, and some of these places, they're either very underfunded or not funded at all, and they're being paid as you go out of the local budget.
It brings us segues right nicely into what we call Act 2 of your life. And thank you, Mr. Cusack, for those questions, because it provides us this forum. You become elected general treasurer. You're elected with over 70% of the vote. Clearly a mandate. One of the things that's forgotten as being part of general treasurer, since we've all become experts in pensions over the last few years, it's almost like we've had an online university education in pension benefits. The average Rhode Islander...
University of Phoenix pensions.
Exactly.
Well, and it was the same in 1991, where Rhode Islanders became experts in bank insurance, FDIC, NCUA. We really had another online degree there.
I'm of that
University of
age.
Pain.
I'm of that age that you mentioned earlier, P.O., where I vaguely remember the banking crisis, and to this day, my father, who's kind of an old school guy, just throws up when he sees a credit union. He will not do business with a credit union till this day.
Well, there was a point in time, you talk about civil disobedience. The folks who ran, I think it was Operation Clean Government, actually shut down parts of Interstate 95, marching up 95 during rush hour to protest. A significant portion of the state all of a sudden found itself literally penniless overnight. So it's instructive to us on a variety of levels. Now, phase forward to the mid-2000s. You're elected general treasurer at the height of what turned out to be the boom years. Things are great in America. You walk in, and I guess, 2006, and, you're towards the end of the Clinton regime, the time nicely with a booming economy. All of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, Give us just the thought process. You were able to essentially give us an escape hatch on two different levels. First of all, you had the mortgage-based obligations and the CDO obligations that the state was going to be involved in. And then secondly, you had our exposure to AIG. Now, people forget for a moment, because we become so pension obsessed, that the other part of the state treasurer's office is involved in cash management. The state at any one time has billions of dollars of both their own and fiduciary funds belonging to other people that you're responsible for managing. So just if that whole mess, how did we avoid that one?
Well, it was 2007. The music was playing very nicely. Everybody was dancing. It was a perfect time.
Putting on the Ritz.
The market, yes, and the stock market was at the time, a very high level. And again, this was on the heels, if you remember, March of 2000 was the previous high. So we had crashed after 2000. The internet bubble burst, and and now here we were, 7 years later, and we had climbed all the way back to similar numbers in the indexes, and the credit was available everywhere. People were buying cars, buying houses, no money down, 120% of the value of the house you could borrow, and everybody was having a good time. And then in late 2007, early 2008, things started to unravel. And in Rhode Island, again, I said about the exiting the subprime mortgage bonds in our securities lending program. Again, a lot of Wall Street talk, but the short version was we got out of some holdings that if we had stayed in them in 2007, we would have ended up having to find a lot of money to plug that hole, and other states had to do that because they got stuck with a lot of these subprime mortgage bonds. When it comes to, you mentioned cash management, at any point in time, the state has hundreds of millions, if not billions, on deposit, and it needs to have that money available to pay bills and to pay off projects like road construction or dormitory construction, things that are going on. And if you have that in certain banks or insurance companies, and those entities have problems, like you mentioned AIG, then all of a sudden you may have a road that was built that you can't pay for, or a building or a dormitory. And I think we called it a SWAT team. We formed a SWAT team in the Treasurer's office, and we got all the people from different parts of the Treasury and other government entities that dealt with that process, and we were able to, through our action, and that's one good thing about Rhode Island, is because everybody's physically close to one another, no matter how far you live away, and usually have worked together in the past somewhere along the way. We were able to navigate that, and we had some money that was locked up for a short period of time with a fund called the Reserve Fund. Right. But even that was eventually freed up, and we worked with Senator Reid in Washington, and at the time Senator Dodd, the treasurer from Connecticut, and I were able to make our case there. But that's what you do as a someone who's in office, and you don't want to sit in your hands and say somebody else will do it. You get out of the office and you go and get in front of the right people and make the case, and hopefully shape policy that gets Rhode Island to the right side of the ledger and whatever the issue is. And I look back on those years, and there was an old time state treasurer from the state of Washington. He had been in office, I think, 20 plus years, and we were at one of these national meetings, and it was when everything was going a little wild with the markets back in 2008, 2009. And he said, I remember in a national meeting, he stood up and he said, well, you first-term state treasurers, you're lucky. He said, because you're getting about a decade's worth of experience over these last, couple of years.
Thanks.
So, coming from someone that had been in office for a couple of decades, I took notice of that. So, so I may have only been there for 4 years, but, maybe it was a decade or more of experience.
Dog years. Well, that brings up an important point, skill sets. Again, for those of us who are not in the financial community, we tend to lump everybody together in typically some type of pejorative term associated with it when it comes to financial people. There really are distinct skill sets involved in treasury operations. I'm fortunate I work for a large accounting firm in a multinational. So you had the Treasury Department and the accounting department. The Treasury Department is really very distinct from a skill set purpose from what's employed in general accounting, isn't it? I mean, it's really just a different religion, if you will. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. Whether it's an audit or an accounting function, there's a set of facts in front of you, and you're going back to confirm them, and test and do samples and make sure that everything matches up. But a treasury function, there's one side which is let's make sure we have the cash on hand to pay the bill, and manage that flow. And then the other side is the, looking out into the future from an investment perspective and having an allocation of the assets in a way that hopefully minimizes the risk but gets a strong return. So, different skill sets.
I mean, don't get me wrong. You'll have some fine general auditors work for you, correct? I mean, you'll have some great accountants who will be as part of your staff. But ultimately, you're running a Treasury Department, which, if it were a private corporation, would be the size of really a Fortune 200 company. I mean, it's in a sense, it's a business within the business of government.
Yeah, and Rhode Island also, because we do, from a Treasury perspective, a lot of things that in other states are dealt with at the county level and not so much at the state level in some places. Even though we're not one of the larger states, we rank more near the middle of the pack when it comes to the size issues we deal with, whether it's in our pension fund or in our cash management, because of this centralized government we have, again, not having a county level.
Interesting. Now, phase forward to the next act. You re-enter the private world. You re-enter private industry. I guess you're currently managing director of Chatham Capital, and you folks specialize in, I guess, what's called mezzanine financing. So currently, and again, getting back to the mantra here, we tend to take financial firms and just kind of lump them together. When in reality, you've got firms that, like a Bain, for example, that became famous in the last election, are famous for buying assets and then reevaluating them euphemistically. We've got companies that simply invest money and whatever their market algorithms are following, track the market and trying to trend with it and expand on that. Your business, and this kind of brings into some of the work you did as general treasurer. Your business right now, explain to the listener, you're involved in finding legitimate financing sources for mid-sized companies who are actually, you're actually contributing to the growth pattern of these companies, some of which are based in the Northeast. And one of them, I guess, we did a little research here. There's a company called Crimson Rose, which at one point your firm was involved in structuring the finance. So there's some real success stories there in terms of incorporating that same type of experience.
Yeah, well, Chatham Capital is a firm that's been around a little over a decade, and it focuses on what's called the lower middle market. And what that means is companies that have usually about 50 to 500 employees and, sales in the millions, maybe up to, 50 to 100 million. And it's usually a family-owned business. That is someone started out as a dream and they built it, and they get to a stage where they either want to make an acquisition or they want to continue to grow at a certain pace, and the traditional financing from a bank does not work for them, because as we've all seen, if you go to a bank and you want to borrow money, the bank usually says, well, what do you have for assets? Well, my house is worth X, my car is worth Y, I have this much money in the bank. And the bank will say, okay, well, if the value of all those assets is $1 million, we'll lend you $500,000. And you say, oh, well, I need a little bit more than that. And so that's where a firm like Chatham comes into play. Is Chatham will look at a business and say, what does the business generate as far as profit or cash? And then it will take that number and we'll lend a multiple of that number. So even though we don't buy companies, it's like we partner with the company and are buying it in a sense that we're lending money to them that they need to stay profitable for 2 or 3 or 4 years in order to repay the loan. And there's a company, right here in Rhode Island called Crimson Rose, which makes in the industry of jewelry and specialty gift type of company, hundreds of employees up in Lincoln, and we got involved with them, and they wanted to buy a company in Florida that was a complementary type of company, and we were still in the rough patch with the economy and the banks, and they needed to borrow quite a bit. I think it was about $9 million, and they needed to do it very quickly. And you got to understand, here's a jewelry industry company, and some people may say, oh, all those jewelry companies, they just sell products that are fads. They're in style for a year or two, and then they're out of style. So not a lot of banks or lenders like to look at those types of industries. And then the other side is who they sell to. They sell to companies like JCPenney and Kohl's and Sears, companies like that. And some of those companies, if you read the headlines in the Wall Street Journal, their finances aren't as strong as they maybe once were. So you have some risk there as a lender saying, gee, some of their customers might not pay the company what they owe them. So you have to be very careful. But that was that ended up being a successful story both for Rhode Island, for the company, and for Chatham. And that company ended up buying the company in Florida, integrating it, growing very strongly, and then they ended up refinancing all the loans they had and then selling the company to a multinational company. And but it's still located here in Rhode Island and employs quite a large number of people. The
type of company you just described, isn't that really the road forward for Rhode Island? I mean, we constantly pitch these huge multinationals to come here. We had a discussion just a few weeks ago with Dave Fisher about some of the financing that went in to get a company into Woonsocket.
Right, the big tax breaks.
The big tax breaks.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, it would appear to me that Rhode Island is ideally suited for companies in that $50 to $250 million space. That's what we need here. They're employing 400 people locally. Good paying jobs in a clean environment. How do we get that expertise so that government stops being less of a block to that? That's interesting. Now flash forward. You're running for general treasurer again. Now everything we've just described, law career, finance career, You've done your time in politics. You've given a lot of time to the state. I got to ask you, why are you coming back? I mean, not that we don't want to see you, but holy cow!
No, I look at where the state is right now, and we've almost decoupled from the regional economy. We have Massachusetts seems doing very well, low unemployment, and a lot of opportunity for the kids coming out of school and for the people that are looking for work. And then we come here in Rhode Island, and I've been fortunate in the last 3 years. I've been doing business on a national footprint, so I've seen what's going on in a lot of places. And this Rhode Island's such a beautiful place. We have hardworking people, and if we're not going to do it now, then when? And I couldn't just sit back on my hands and say, I'm here in the private sector, I'm working hard and doing all these things, and let the opportunity to come back, put my name in front of the voters with a vision for that treasurer's office of, let's be the best treasurer's office in the country. Let's be the most user-friendly treasurer's office. Customer service will be number one, just as it was when I was there before. And let's be a model for what Rhode Island can be, not a place where people are saying they're going to leave or they don't want to stay here or there's no opportunity for their kids or their grandkids to find a job. Right. So I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and do what's necessary. I'm fortunate. I have a daughter that went to college here at RISD and stayed in the state and worked in the jewelry industry and now is still involved locally, both with that business and in the real estate world. And I have a son who's 16, be coming out of college in another year, and coming out of high school another year and a half. And, and I look at the world through their eyes many times saying, what do they see here in Rhode Island and what's the future for them and their peers? And I'm willing to do everything necessary to make sure that they have the, great opportunities and that Rhode Island is not, a place that just decouples from this, regional economy, and who knows where it ends.
What do you see us being able to pick up on quickly that other players like Massachusetts are doing well?
Yeah, well, Rhode Island, because of our size, we should be that small company that can make changes quickly and outmaneuver the bigger guys. Massachusetts, whether it's, tax structure or ease of permitting and things like that, if they're doing it in Massachusetts, we should look to replicate that. I think, instead of having, this border and then all of a sudden a whole different set of issues that a company would have to deal with. What can we do quickly? We can say to all our local businesses who have been here and created jobs and paid their bills for years that you are our number one priority. Number one, we want to be here, not to be in your way, get out of your way, listen to you, and be responsive. It's so much easier to save an existing company or an existing customer than to lose that one and go find a new one.
Exactly.
That's one thing I've learned in business through the years.
Right.
So
that's the number one marketing thing they tell you.
Let's stop the
stop the churn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The bleeding, some may say, and be user friendly for the existing businesses. Again, coming out of the world that I've been in with looking at medium and smaller companies and trying to find financing for them, we could do a better job of getting lenders like that, more active in Rhode Island, welcoming them in, and even incentivizing them, put up a big chunk of their own money, and maybe there's a small role for an economic development corporation to be alongside that money, not be making decisions,
and not making $75 million decisions
to one entity in a suspect industry,
incubator type things instead. No, I liked your point about if a small state could be more nimble.
It happens every day in the private sector. The small guy outmaneuvers the big guy,
and happens in Delaware often enough.
Yeah.
In our remaining few minutes, and I feel like we could go another hour, but in our remaining few minutes, I'm going to give you some just real quick questions, and just if you can give us just some quick bullet responses. And I know some of these aren't easy. Okay.
Lightning round.
Right, lightning round, exactly. Ray Rickman, one of our alumni, asked a question: is the state ready to assist communities in professionally engaging in cash management? Do you think that's something you'd like to see happen more on a more sophisticated level?
With today's technology, something like that should be implemented, and we shouldn't have the barriers between cities and towns. And the city or town could end up probably saving quite a bit of money being part of a larger, part of a larger pool of money.
There you go. Mike Riley, former candidate for Congress, asks, is the appropriate discount rate, or some of us not in the industry would refer to as the performance rate for pension liabilities? Gina wants it to be 7.5%. Warren Buffett says it would be 6%. The SEIU says it should be 8.5%. What do you think an appropriate expected rate of return?
The 7.5 that we have puts us in a comfortable place when you look at us compared to other plans. Warren Buffett is saying 6%, and he has said that consistently. That if you're in the situation where you can be very let's say astute and conservative with your planning to keep it as low as possible. But from a government perspective, Rhode Island has moved from being more at the the kind of the 3/4 point, to the higher end with the old rate of return to now the 7.5, and that process started when I was in office in 2009 and 10, where I started the experience study that was completed then when Treasurer Mundo came in 2011, and then the retirement board took all that work, and and I was attacked when I started the experience study, saying we shouldn't have looked at lowering
why
it
should
from
we
the
look at anything?
Exactly. So it was over 2 terms that process had to happen. But that's how I looked at it. So yeah, to Mr. Riley, who I have great respect for his accomplishments in the financial world. I would answer that saying where we are now is okay by me.
Okay, and quickly the legal circus surrounding the pension renegotiation of the negotiation of the pension reform. We had Dawson Hodson, who's running for Attorney General. He sees that, and I'm using my words, as a complete farce. Should the courts be renegotiating a settlement that it was arrived at through a legislative process that was confirmed by all?
Well, the open issue there is that there's case law in Rhode Island on cost of living components in pensions, and whether those can be taken away once they're started with a retiree. And because of that line of cases, I think that it would be wise for the state to, if they can fashion a solution that takes that issue out of the courts and resolves this once and for all. That's something that I've already publicly said I'd be in favor of getting that lawsuit resolved. I'm afraid that if it's not resolved and it goes all the way through our court system, that there could be a decision at the end that says the whole reform that was passed, that legislation, is unconstitutional, and now we're back to a big budget problem in our state, a potential $300-400 million gap in the budget. So if we can resolve that for a fraction of that $300 or $400 million annual price tag, again, maybe that's the lawyer in me coming out. I'd rather have certainty and closure and resolution than putting it in front of an arbiter where it's unknown what the result may be, and we may not like the result.
Unfortunately, we do have to hold it there. Mr. Caprio, thank you for your time. For more information on his candidacy, go to frankcaprio.com. That is frankcaprio.com. P.O., Christine, a fantastic job as always.
Why, thank you, Tony.
I'm not just saying that because I'm not a guy that just says stuff.
Well, you kind of are. But
CoalitionRadio.us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and on Twitter @Coalition_Radio. Be sure to join us each and every week.